come in. Good morning, everyone. So welcome to the Climate Change and LECP webinar this morning, hosted, as I mentioned, by myself, Darren Barry, and my colleague, Kieran Lynch. So I'm going to pass off to Kieran now, who's going to start this morning.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Very glad to be with you this morning. And I suppose this is very much about the climate change within the LECP, and just a few things to reflect on, I suppose, at the start. And the first point is that, climate change is real and it's now. That's just the reality. And I suppose, look, I'm sure you're all well up with that. There's been so much talk about it, and very much talk about it within the local authorities, indeed, over the last period of time, and at government level, and in the public discourse, and in the news, and so on. And we don't have any choice except to respond. That is really that is the reality. And this response is going to have to be at lots of different levels, and it's going to have to be both encouraged and required. That's the reality of all of these kind of situations where there are really important but challenging events happening in the world, and where a response is required. But we even saw it in the COVID. There was a very good response through encouragement, but there were certain things then that had to be, if you like, enforced as well. And we're going to see the same, and we are seeing the same with regard to climate change and climate action. And obviously, and sometimes, when you're focusing very much on a particular area, and it happens to us as well, you can almost start to feel that the whole weight of dealing with climate change is on the LECP, and it's being asked to be the solution. But it's not. But it could be an important part of the solution. But there's lots of other big activities and big things going on as well outside of the LECP process. But I suppose what we're thinking of, and what the guidelines are asking, is that the LECP and its process and its outcomes and its activities make an important contribution. And I think it is definitely fair to say that obviously this is a whole of society response is what's needed here to all of this. We keep saying this. In fact, it's a whole of the global society response is what's needed. And everybody is going to be asked and is going to have to play their part. And that means individuals, obviously, individual households, and communities and community organizations. And, yourselves and the other people delivering the LECP, you interact with businesses at the economic end, and with communities and the organizations that are within them and that represent them in a very special way, in a very kind of engaged type of way, and in a personal kind of a way, which is very suitable to climate action. And I suppose that's why in many ways the LECP is seen as a good vehicle, and you're seen as important ambassadors for this whole approach. But I suppose we just wanted to say that at the start, that while we're focusing very much on the LECP today, its contribution is what we're talking about, and we don't anticipate, nor does anybody anticipate that it is the total solution. Stop there. We'll find it. Okay, so just very briefly to start with, and I know that you're familiar with this anyway, I'm sure, but just what the guidelines, the LECP guidelines actually say. And there's a very comprehensive set of guidelines have been issued after, I know, a lot of consideration and a lot of reflection and a lot of input indeed from a lot of different people around the country. So first of all, the climate change includes both the global warming driven by the human emissions of greenhouse gases, these anthropogenic greenhouse gases, as they say, and the large-scale shifts in weather patterns. So, some of you I know who have been at other of these trainings will have gone through some of those and some of the big changes that are happening around the world, and indeed in Ireland, with regard to weather patterns and the impacts that the global warming is having on all of that. And then I suppose the real thing then is the downstream impacts of those changes in the weather patterns. So it's the kind of real felt impact is a major part of the issue, and responding to those then as well is another major consideration in all of this. So the guidelines say the consideration of the role of the LECP in supporting the delivery of actions in local and national climate action plans should form part of the LECP. So that means the LECP does link into your own local climate action plans, and Darren will talk, I think, a little more about that. So that you need to be looking at those, and you need to be consulting those and seeing what's in those, and how the LECP and the activities arising out of the LECP can help to deliver those, and particularly, I suppose, within the implementation plans. But also then it has to be reflected, obviously, in the high-level goals and the objectives as well. So if you have a local energy agency, I suppose that's part of what's being said as well. Sorry, turn this off. So obviously, I'm part of the whole idea, and part of the whole LECP approach, of course, is working with others and working with other organizations. And obviously, if you have a local energy agency, then they would be a really important part of this particular exercise, because they will be very much engaged, particularly, I suppose, in the whole renewable energy area and energy efficiency and all of that, all of which are very important elements of this whole climate action agenda. And then the mitigating the climate change impact of enterprise and commercial activity, that's another important focus of this, and how can you help make that happen? So the sustainable community objectives then are looking both at mitigation and adaptation. As we've always said, and we say this everywhere we're talking, there are two types of things to think about. The first is targeted climate actions, so things which are specifically targeted at achieving either mitigation or adaptation within the climate area, but also then thinking about how can some climate consideration be introduced into a very broad range of things, because a lot of things will be going on, obviously, where the primary purpose isn't climate action, but where they can still be tailored to having a climate action relevance. And I suppose that's another important way of thinking about all of this. So it's not just about the specific climate actions, it's about, I suppose, weaving climate thinking in and out of a lot of the different aspects of all of the activities of the local authority and of other agencies, but particularly in this case, the LECP. And then the climate change are cross-cutting, because they may affect, they may be seen both at the community level, at the business level, and at different and the economic level, and at different aspects of those particular areas as well. So this is just continuing on with what the guidelines say, because I suppose this is the context in which we're talking to you this morning. The consideration of climate action should complement the role of the NDCA, the Local Authority Climate Action Plan, the City County Development Plan. And then I think this is important. This is why we've highlighted this, taking into consideration the specific role that local initiatives could have in achieving overall county goals as they relate to climate change. And I think that's the important point, is the local initiatives, because as I've said at the start, there are going to be lots of large scale, and I mean, you see them all there, they're all in the National Climate Action Plans and so on, but there's very large scale initiatives taking place as well. And I suppose this is the local initiative contribution to the whole agenda that we're looking at, and that the LECP is looking at. Identifying and supporting community action to address climate change through actions of mitigation or adaptation, and either as directly targeted actions or as elements of actions targeted other priorities, is one area of operation within the LECP. So I suppose that's a kind of, I suppose, a summary in a sense of what I was saying, earlier on. I suppose the point that I would say as well, that I suppose that is maybe phrased a little negatively there, and maybe it shouldn't be. When I'm saying not a huge amount of practical help, I suppose the guidelines are guidelines. They're saying what you should be trying to achieve. What it's not saying so much, and that's understandable indeed. I mean, obviously guidelines can't do this, and this is why we're having this session this morning, I suppose, is how do you do that? How do you make those things happen? How do you bring those things? What are the kinds of things that you might be thinking of? What are the kinds of initiatives that you might be looking at? And of course, as I say, some of them will be linked locally to your own climate action plan, to your own county development plan. And indeed, now the county development plan now has to have regard to climate. So, and the LECP then can have regard to what's in the county development plan, for example. So that there are kind of, linkages now starting to happen. And what we're talking this morning, I suppose, is some of the practical steps that you might be able to take with regard to all of that. And I mean, you have a huge range of tools at your disposal. We're not going to go through all these now, obviously, but it's just that, there's lots of things happen and lots of things go on. And you can really start thinking, and particularly, I suppose, when it comes to the implementation phase and it comes to the action plans, you can really start thinking of, what are the kinds of things that we can do. And I mean, there are, training, education, mentoring, capacity building, research, benchmarking, planning, awareness raising, community activation, network development, getting communities working together, community planning, interagency action plans, marketing, competitions, events. I mean, there's just so many things that you can actually do and give them a climate change focus. And as I said, other ways, of course, of incorporating climate change thinking into different areas. So I suppose it's just to remember, I suppose, that there's a huge range of potential tools at your disposal in terms of making the climate action happen. So this is the process out of the guidelines, and I suppose the diagram is directly out of the guidelines, and then the bit down the right is our take on it in a sense. What are the high level goals for climate? How to consult on the climate goals is a question. Then the objectives and outcomes we're looking at, and then obviously the next stage is bring it to the SPC and the LCDC and how what might you need to do. We won't go into that in too much detail. And then actions, we'll talk a good bit about potential actions at the end, and then a little bit about the monitoring and the evaluation at the very end as well. And some of this, by the way, some of what we talk about, it does have a climate focus, obviously, but some of it is applicable to all aspects of the LECP, to everything that's going on with regard to the preparation and implementation of the LECP. It's not specifically climate, but I suppose it's a question of saying you need to think about this aspect of things within the climate context. Okay, so I think Darren, you're going to take over the next bit, because we're going to start by thinking about the high level goals.
Absolutely, thanks so much, Kieran. So as Kieran said, this is the process around the development of the LECP, and we're going to go through the different actions and the different stages of this. And the initial stage we're going to talk about is what are the high level goals for climate. And one of the things we need to do is, or one thing you need to, is to assess the basic or baseline conditions for your county, your region, your local area, with respect to all the residents and the working populations and everything in there. This includes considerations of things like the current uses and activity that may be displaced or impacted by changes in our climate, changes in land use, changes in development that need to take place. We also need to review a number of the socioeconomic characteristics of the surrounding area in order to understand what that impact is going to have on the changes that are happening. And I suppose we're looking at the moment that our census of population is being undertaken, but the results of that won't be out for a while. We're delayed in that. And so some of the stuff we're looking at is out of date and from the old census. So we need to have a look at how we can understand what's happening within our communities and within our local areas. And there's a number of different ways and sections that we can look at. And changes that are going to happen. And I'll talk more about some of the goals around these in a moment. But things like the occupational shift, the income category, settlement patterns, transport, communication, land use change, which is a really important one, education level. These are just some of the traditional parameters that we look at for that socio-economic change. And including those, we're going to have some climate change parameters that's going to be needed to be used in that analysis. And this might, for example, include analyze the vulnerability of the current socioeconomic and natural conditions to future climate change. So what areas are under threat? What areas do we need to look at? Where our big impacts happen? For example, if we take a look at the agricultural sector, which we know we've talked about a number of times over the last number of years, and is a big hotbed topic when it comes to climate change. But there is changes continually happening within the agricultural sector. And one of the things we need to look at as communities is food security. Food security is a massive issue with our changing climates. For one reason is that our growing season has started to change. The type of crops are going to have to change over the coming years as we've longer, hotter summers, colder, wetter winters, increased storms. So that food security idea is really important at a local and community level. And we can look at things like community gardens and community co-op initiatives that are happening throughout a number of counties. That farm to place technique that a lot of communities are looking at as well. So that's only kind of one idea where we're setting that strategic goal on our socioeconomic thing, ensuring that people obviously need food and that we have access to that food, and that we in particular have local access. And that's one of the ways we're going to really hit some of our targets and hit some of those plans in regards to climate change, is buying local, staying local, and which is really important. So some of those things, some of the suggested approaches then to setting these socioeconomic goals. One is we have to look at our occupational shifts. We know that there's going to be change in the roles that are happening at a community level. The types of businesses that are there, particularly if we think of some older Irish businesses that are there that are going to struggle to change. So one thing to look at is what is the current skill level and what skills are needed to meet that change in the work pattern as we go forward. Again, we'll give some ideas of that in a little while as we give some ideas around the actions that you can do. Another thing that you need to look at in regards to socioeconomic is that settlement pattern. What areas are under threat from climate impacts? What community planning strategies are in place for that? One of the big things we have to talk about when we talk about our settlement patterns is that urban-rural link and divide. And it really is now that communities need to start taking care of themselves up to a certain point, taking their own strategies, their own settlement patterns into account within a local region. We can't always expect the local authority to make all the plans, all the decisions for us. We have to start doing, and that's something hard to ask communities to do, but having some processes and plans in place for developing these community strategies is going to be really important as we change some settlement patterns. Obviously, one of the big things we talk about when we talk about climate is our transport. And one of the things we're going to have to look at is that urban links. What are the public transport needs? What can we do to change those? We know as part of the climate action plan, there needs to be a certain amount of electric buses on the roads, electric cars, power charging points, and what are our strategies around that? Not only for creating new commuter lines to reduce the amount of cars in certain areas, but what can we do to electrify those vehicles as well? What is needed? And some of those answers are going to be at a national level that we can't come up with, but each community or each local authority needs to come up with some of those plans. We're also going to look in regards to land use change as well. There's a lot of increased flood zones that are happening. Areas that have never flooded in the past are now starting to flood. Areas that are being lost completely if they're built too close to cliff faces, etc. Green space as well. We need an increase in green spaces in all rural, in all urban areas as well. And the actions to protect those green spaces at a community level are really, really important. And one of the big things from our climate action plan and the strategies at all local government levels is reforestation, looking at our wooded forested areas to ensure that we have strategies to protect those. And you'll see a lot of these, we can set up community groups to protect and reforest a lot of areas as well. And a lot of counties or communities throughout Ireland are doing that. And it's taking that local ownership of your biodiversity and your heritage. And I suppose one of the big things that we have to look at is that educational level as well. And if I could just ask everyone to ensure that their mics are muted, that'd be great, thank you. At the education level, what programs are being developed by our local third level initiatives? And this established links with the local community program or educational programs, and particularly things like CPD courses, continuous professional development courses, which are really, really important to continue to upskill and retrain people in the local area. And particularly for those community groups, having someone to go on an upskilling program in regards to maybe climate action, community planning, things like that is really, really important. So at local levels, looking and making contacts with the educational institutes to make those happen is really important. We know that when you drive a car, buy a pair of shoes, or whatever we do, we contribute to the emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. And that's what's called our carbon footprint. And many counties and countries, institutions, companies have all committed to reduce their emissions, while the EU has set that level to be climate neutral by 2050. And small changes really make a big difference at a community level. And in the long run, communities, businesses, and regional projects help us to meet those targets. And some practicalities can be and should be built into the LECP. Setting local activities and community actions are really the best step to achieving and implementing any of these high level or socioeconomic goals that we're looking at in regards to climate action. Two things like we need to identify what matters to communities in relation to climate action and climate resilience, both now and in the future. Remember, climate action is going to create, the impacts of climate action are going to increase over the next number of years and decades. So we have wants and needs for communities now, but we also need to start some future planning and have that overall strategic goal. As part of LECP as well, we also need to create awareness about those effective climate action measures, looking at the best research that is out there. And also to what we can work on is to pilot replicable or demonstrational projects and evaluate those, see what's happening with other counties. We know, and I've said this lots of times in every training you do, climate change knows no boundaries. So our research, our understanding, our projects shouldn't know any boundaries as well. Work with communities together, nearby communities further, and see what's happening in those, what's happening in the other side of the country as well. We also need to utilize best practice in promoting these economic opportunities that arise from climate action with our local enterprises. There's going to be, as I mentioned, an increase in heat in the summer, longer, drier, warmer summers. So looking at our increased maybe tourism activities in the summer, or heritage activities, heritage protection, biodiversity activities is really, really important as well. And we also need to promote the development of a thriving green economy, in which enterprises are supported to take advantage of emerging green business opportunities. And that's something where the LECP can really work in that economic side of it. And as I mentioned, globally, emissions are linked to what we put on our plates. So those, for example, those local food miles programs, or community gardens, integration of more food cultures that we see as our cultural footprint within our communities is changing. So maybe then what we should do is ensure that the types of food that we have is local and usable for those different cultures as well. So those food learning programs are extremely important. So one of the most important, and we know climate change is one of the most important areas currently being addressed by our cities and counties throughout Ireland. And there's a number of different programs and a number of different publications out there that you can get a lot of this information from. In 2020, a profile of local government climate action was published and highlighted the local government sector actions in energy efficiency, sustainable transport development, flood risk management, water conservation, waste management, nature-based solutions, and public engagement. Also in late 2020, the Delivering Effective Climate Action Strategy 2030 was completed as well. So this strategy really is considered a roadmap for the entire local government sector to deliver on its commitments. And it applies a common vision for the sector and sets out solid objectives for local authorities to work towards in order to maximise their collective impacts on Ireland's national climate targets. These are only two of the number of different publications that are out there, and different research and objective patterns that are out there we can use to help inform some of the work we do in the LECP development. Because as Kieran said, there should be linkages between a number of different things. We know that the LECP isn't the only thing that's ongoing. So have a look at what else is out there. And we know as well that the local authority climate action plan is going on to development as well, and to be yearly reviewed. So what you need to do is to understand what came before, what were the plans, policies there already, what ones were achievable, what ones worked well, and what ones can we do, and then look at those needs and visions for the future and the strategic goals for achieving success as we move towards the development of the LECP and the implementation of it. So Kieran, I'm going to pass back to you there.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. So that's the first, excuse me, that's the first stage of the process, is setting the high level goals for and obviously for the LECP as a whole, but for climate is what we are particularly talking about. Sorry, now, yes, let's get back to my. So the next phase then really is how to consult on the climate goals, and because it's at this point. So that first stage, as you know, is done through the socioeconomic analysis, and it's done with the advisory group involved very much in that as well, in producing those goals. So obviously engaging with those, and then indeed I would actually say as well, just in passing, when you're putting your advisory group together, having somebody on it with competence in this area is something to consider. And again, that may be where you can get somebody from your energy agency, or maybe from within the local authority itself, quite possibly, or from maybe one of your local academic institutions or somewhere like that. And then in terms of the consulting and the climate goals, not going to talk too much about this, but I suppose it just to remember this, I guess, that we'd recommend a kind of a planned approach to this consultation and indeed to the consulting as a whole in any event, but to make sure that the climate element is included in the planning of your consultation process, and that you're thinking it through in terms of its particular characteristics. Okay, and I suppose, you know, the whole idea of this, and the whole idea and the guidelines actually say it, is that, you know, very wide consultation is expected in this, right? So that the community as a whole is able to get involved. And when you're consulting around something like this, something which is very, you know, people aren't used to it. People don't have this embedded kind of knowledge that you'll find in other aspects of the LECP. Then you probably have to consider, how are we going to mediate this and get people's feeling about it and people's feedback. Obviously, you'll have different groups, and there'll be different levels of knowledge in different groups. Where you have knowledgeable people who are familiar with the topic and familiar with the concepts and familiar with the kind of measurements and so on, that's probably less challenging in that they'll be able to, you know, to let you know what they feel about what is being proposed. But making it meaningful for others, which are probably the vast majority of people, that is the challenge in a sense. So when you're setting these high-level goals, and when you have these high-level climate goals, in terms of the consultation, and in a way, this is almost, you know, you almost have to preempt a further stage of the process, because in this particular context, it is important that the meaning of these goals is brought to people. So it does, you know, some examples of what this might mean in practice for different sectors. That may be something you need to do at this point, at the consultation point. You know, what are the kinds of things that might need to be done? Now, at this point, I don't think you have to be saying this is precisely what will have to be done or anything like that, because I'm not sure we even know exactly. But the kinds of things, what the implications of this goal, what are the implications of that? You know, what might it mean in practice for different communities? Because in the end of the day, I suppose this is what people really want to know. And indeed, I know in other presentations that we've made, Darren always emphasizes, you know, that what people really want to know is, how is it going to affect me, and how is it going to affect my community? And I think that is a very important part of the whole consideration. And then what are there alternatives? Are there different ways of doing this? And if there are alternatives, what are they? And are you saying to people, look, we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do a bit of both? You know, what way might we go? Okay. Oops, sorry. Oh gosh, I got stuck there for a while. It wouldn't move. Then it moved like a shot. Okay, and just just to talk very briefly, this is something, again, just to think about, okay? There are principles of scientific communication. There's a whole body of knowledge developed on communicating scientific concepts and scientific ideas. And some of the kind of considerations that go into that are, first of all, this idea of patience. Especially if you've been engaging in this field, if you've been thinking about it a lot, and you're up to date with it, and you have a kind of internalized. Not everybody will be in that place. So patience in kind of bringing people along, giving them space to get used to the ideas and to get to understand things. That's an important part of the process, and giving them space so that when they are feeding back, they're feeding back on something that they understand, and that you're not getting kind of knee-jerk feedback, because in the end of the day, that actually isn't helpful, because then people are saying something to you, but in the wrong context, and then when you try to implement it, it can cause problems. Obviously, communicating with rather than at people. I know we're communicating at you today, but it's that kind of involved and engaged type of communication is really important. So it is kind of giving people the opportunity to feedback, giving that sense of engagement, of genuine engagement, so that it's a dialogue rather than a one-way flow of information. Acknowledge your own biases and values, because that is important as well. Just to say, these are the things that drive me. These are the things that I think are important. We think these things are important. Passionate is really, really important. One of the things about this communication is that it is a kind of a person-to-person type communication. In order to bring about change, in order to bring about behavior change, that kind of person-to-person type of engagement is important. So when people can see that you're really committed to this, that you're passionate about it yourself, I think that's an important part of that method of communicating this stuff. Have a diverse and interdisciplinary team. I think that's the other side of this. And that's really something I think to think about in the whole communication and the engagement on this. You need people who are skilled at who know the science, people who know the information, not at a highly involved level or anything like that, but who know the science well, particularly to be able to respond to questions and things like that if they arise. But then you also need the people who are skilled at the community engagement side. So you kind of need to bring that mix of people together. Knowing your audience, not all your audiences will be the same, as I just mentioned previously. So know the audience, and what are the things that drive that audience? What are the things that are of importance to that audience? And you need to shape your message in that context. Obviously, always truthfully, but what you emphasize, I suppose, is the point. What are the things that you emphasize for different audiences? Have a story to tell. Stories are really important, particularly where people aren't really familiar with the topic, but they will understand the story. And so having a story to tell that will resonate, having a good example of something that happened elsewhere, that kind of thing. Make the message personal to the listener. That's that point about that individual to individual engagement. So trying to make it something that the individual people will engage with. And then building the big picture first. So, we need to talk about the big picture, about the whole global situation, about the global challenge. And almost like I was saying at the very beginning, about what we're asking you to do, where does that fit into this whole big picture of the changes that we have to make, and why are those changes so important and so urgent? And there are challenges about communicating climate change. First of all, it is hard to see it as immediate. We respond to things that are threatening and immediate. The COVID is a real example of that, and how communities responded, and local authorities responded, and other bodies responded. And I mean, it was exemplary, really. But the point about that was that everybody felt it as being a real threat and as being immediate and now. There's a slight problem with the climate action, even though it is now, and it is a thing of now. There's a danger that people think about it as being in the future, partly because we talk about the future. We talk about our targets are 2030, 2040, 2050. Now, they're not that far away, but people, think when that kind of perspective is given, people can kind of discount it a little bit and say, well, that's a bit down the road, and it's not felt as being immediate. What we can do individually as a community can be seen as limited in the big picture, in the big global picture. Although, as I always say, if 7 billion people did a small thing, it would have a huge impact. So the individual is crucial. And we are asking for big changes. There's no doubt about that. I mean, some kind of transformative type change is going to have to happen if this is going to be effective, because the small thing, they won't make it, the little changes won't make it, won't make achieve the outcome that we're looking for at this stage. So it will probably ask for some changes in lifestyle ultimately. And I don't think we've quite got to that point where we understand that yet, We kind of feel we can keep going, maybe with a tweak here and a tweak there, but we can keep going the way we have been. I mean, I honestly believe that this is a personal viewpoint. I think underlying all of this really is a requirement to lower our consumption of everything. Really, I have that feeling that's what we're being asked, which of course is totally counter to the thrust of society and everything for the last 50 years. And then there'll be differential capacities and differential effects. Different people will experience the impact of this differently. Some people will experience it more. Some people will feel more threatened by this than others. So that kind of communication again has to be conscious of that, be conscious of the fears of some people. And then of course the whole just transition aspect of it, how do we engage with the hard to reach communities who may well be more affected by some of this than others? And I suppose I don't have absolute answers for you in any of this. What I'm saying is these are some of the things that we need to think about when we're designing our engagement and our consultation processes around this. So, and we need to be careful that we don't just ask, the representative bodies and the normal people who gather around these things, because they may not be those who will be most threatened and are those most likely to suffer most. So we really have to think about that. The uncertainty of impact of what we do. I think sometimes people don't see the linkage between what they do and the climate impact, if you know what I mean. So that's a thing, again, to think about how do we make that clear? And then, of course, I mean, at the really negative end of it, the denial and distrust thing, this denial by people who just don't want to believe this because it suits them not to believe it. And then the distrust in parts of society where there is a distrust of, say, government, a distrust of, those communicating these kinds of things. Now, I think in Ireland, we're quite well placed relative to other parts of the world in this, in that there is an overall trust in government, in this large level, at the large level. But you will find certainly parts of society that won't have that trust, and so there's another barrier to be overcome there. So there's no point in thinking that this communicating isn't challenging. It is, and I suppose for that reason, what we're saying is it's necessary really to plan for it in some kind of focused and coherent kind of a way as to how are we going to do this, and maybe not do it in the normal kinds of way. The other thing, of course, obviously having a more positive message can help. Darren mentioned that. So the message from climate change isn't all negative. And I mean, it's bad if we do nothing about it, but we can do something about it in the first point. So that's the good thing. And doing something can bring other positives, green economy, other ways of improving our lives and improving our lifestyles and our life balance and all of those kinds of things. And of course, new ways of doing something about it are always developing. I mean, some of you I well remember, because of course I've been in this kind of space for a long time. But I mean, when the solar panels came out first, for example, they were very inefficient. Now they're very efficient. So there's been a big technology change there. But we can't be waiting for the magic bullet of the future, and there probably isn't one anyway. There's a lot of things that we have to do. But developing a positive message as well as the challenging things that we're asking for can be part of all of this, asking these questions. So I think, Darren, you're going to take the next bit again.
I'll pick up here. Thanks, Kieran. So looking at some of those objectives at economic and community levels for climate action, what those outcomes and things could look like. So some of those objectives are what we want to achieve is to limit damages to the economy that grow with temperature change and increasing rates. We know that economy suffers through things like climate impacts such as flooding and things like that. The price of renewable energy is falling, which in our current climate is really good. There's new processes and applications being put in regards to things like better energy communities. And I'll talk a little bit about wind power in a while as well. And the National Economic and Social Council are continuing to provide strategic advice, research and analytical support for that just transition in a lot of communities. Some of the objectives then for communities are to educate communities about climate change. Again, that's something that's really important, as Kieran has just spoken about, and providing those success stories on what other communities are doing to help and protect, conserve natural resources. There's an awful lot of projects from a European level that can be applied on an Irish level as well, and we can get some of those success stories very easily to be used for a number of different topics. And after this, I can send some information regarding that. Increased participation in and understanding the citizen science programs. I'm a big advocate of those citizen science projects and being part of any of our climate action strategies, procedures, the LECPs, because it's getting people directly involved in their communities. And it's that ownership issue that's really, really important. And we also need to understand the role of citizens, public land management agencies and non-governmental agencies in protecting and conserving natural resources. As I mentioned, it can't be always up to the local authority. There has to be some onus put on our communities, our businesses, our education initiatives to do that. And some of the outcomes, what we want and what we can achieve through some of the actions that we can do is new jobs, and particularly green jobs, improved competitiveness, look at cleaner transport technologies, secure supplies. Each year the EU produces a list of raw materials that are under threat. So looking at those each year and seeing what's under threat, what's needed, is there anything we can provide, is there changes that's going to be needed over the next number of years is really important. And scaled up financing. We need to increase our impact in a number of different areas and look at where our financing is going and how it's being used in particular. From the community outcomes, then what we really like to see is community benefit funds and community energy projects supported under renewable electricity auctions. So looking at those better energy communities, smarter energy communities, smarter villages, processes, new social inclusion and community activation programs, again, super important. As we see the inputs with, if we take the Ukrainian refugees into, they're changing some of the footprint of our community. So making sure they're included is really important, and they can bring a lot of benefit to our communities as well. We've seen the enterprise hubs and co-working spaces pop up, particularly recently, some really, really successful ones to look at, such as down in Dingle in County Kerry. Some of those co-working spaces and enterprise hubs are absolutely fantastic work with us. And some of these outcomes that we achieve for climate change can be particularly focused on climate change, or can have climate change as a sub-action. And we need to, what we really need to do is see where they fit in and not try and force a climate action outcome into us, but a lot of them will fit naturally into us. And through the production of our climate action teams in local authorities, our climate action networks within the public sphere, we can get some of those together and working on. So I'll pass back to Kieran there for the SPCs and LCDCs.
Yeah, so very just briefly on this is the next element of it, I suppose, is explaining, and because now we're coming to the SPC and the LCDC, and I suppose it really is that question of making sure that let me see now again, sorry, just get this moving again. Yeah, so you know your own SPC and your own LCDC well, so I suppose it's just to be, and you'd be hoping that the climate agenda would be very much on their agendas, but I suppose it's important to remember that it's the economic SPC and not so much the environment climate SPC that's involved in this. So, so I suppose I'd just be suggesting that it's worth remembering that you may need to, again, almost like at the consultation stage with the public, consider how you're going to bring the climate elements of this. Now, we know it will be in the context of a much broader LECP, obviously, which is covering a very broad range of areas and so on. But it's just, I suppose, for the climate action bit of it, to consider how you're going to present that in a way, again, that will be understandable to people who may not be very much engaged with it on a day-to-day basis, but who will still be asked, to make the decisions and to adopt the LECP. You may need to refer back to guidelines and national policy, I suppose, to set this in place and to explain why there is specific focus on these things. Again, as I say, this is probably worst case scenario in that there's been a lot of training going on. People have been very much, upskilled and up-knowledged in this whole area. So we would be hoping that they will be on board with all of this already. But I suppose just so that again, this is being risk management, I suppose, just to make sure that you have it thought through. And I suppose where there are actions and implications for particular parts of society, it's worth thinking about the mitigations as well that might happen, or at least being able to say that if there are implications, mitigations will also be considered as part of the implementation phase of this. So that's another thing to bear in mind. I suppose because this is at the level of goals and objectives, more than actual actions, it may be a little easier, because it's sometimes where people really start to engage is at the level of the actions, and at the goals and objectives aspect of it. It may be not quite as challenging, but it's just, I suppose, and like we're probably saying this in all of this, and the whole thing is to incorporate the climate thinking into your planning. I suppose that really is the core thing, and to be prepared. And I suppose the other thing is have the right people there when the presentations are being made, so that if questions do arise, the people who can answer those questions are actually present. I think that's part of this, and this goes back to this multidisciplinary approach to all of this. So this on. So really, that's all we wanted to say on that, because to a large extent, a lot of the work will have been done by that stage, and you'll be much better able and will much better know how to engage with your own LCDC and your own SPC. So Darren, I think you're just going to take on the next little bit now.
This is yours.
Is this mine? Sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes, I have one more. Sorry. My apologies. Sorry. Yes, we're just getting into the implementations phase then, which obviously that's the next, this is the action planning part now of the LECP. And as you all know, it's kind of divided into two phases this time around, which I think is really good and is definitely a response, I think, to the feedback that was received, and I think it will have very positive effects. But I just wanted to mention this point as well, which I suppose we haven't kind of maybe mentioned too much up to now, is that it's very important, I feel, that this is more than a local authority document. Very important that the other local development bodies are very involved, and are very involved in terms, of their place in the implementation and the achievement of the goals and objectives of the LECP. Not sure how well that happened in the past. I think it probably was a bit mixed, but I think this time around there's real potential for that to happen, and that means when we talk about the consultation, we didn't talk too much about it specifically on the consultation, because it's a more general point which you'll be addressing, I know anyway, in your general engagement. But it is just to make sure that when the other local development bodies are being when they're participating in the discussions and when they're being involved in the preparation of the goals and objectives and all of that, that they are also being asked to think about the climate aspect of all of this, so that it's not just them focusing on their imperatives, but also that you try and kind of bring the climate action thinking into what everybody is looking at and what everybody is thinking about. And of course, one of the things, and in all of the implementation, is this whole issue of joint actions and collaborative actions and so on. And it's a very fraught area. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think it's a very fraught area. It's obviously, collaborative action is a good thing when it can actually be made happen. But this now I have to say is a very personal view. Okay, so I'm putting that, being honest about that here, that this is a personal view, but based a lot on experience, I would say as well, that when we think about collaboration or cooperation or that kind of working together, so there's a series of different levels. I just have them there: consultative, cooperative, coordinated, and collaborative. And I think one of the things that I would have said from my experience over the years is that trying to force collaborative actions, trying to force actions where people come together, doesn't actually work usually. And where you have a lead body, a lead agency, let's say, and then you have all these other agencies that are going to be part of the group delivering that, it tends not to happen. What tends to happen is the lead agency because the delivery of that lies within their remit and within their obligation. And they basically go and do it. And this idea that others are going to be involved, it might be fine, but trying to make it happen and trying to determine it in advance as to who's going to be involved, I think that's problematic. What you can certainly have, and what tended to happen in my experience in the past, is that where there was a project, and if collaboration or cooperation or coordination is actually part of the mindset, that's part of the culture, then the people who are actually charged with delivering it will themselves say, who do I need to help me with this? And they will go and make that engagement. It won't be something driven by the plan. It'll be something driven by the actual implementation process itself. And where people know each other and have come together and know they can work together, I think that's the way that works. So I would be cautious, I have to say again, about developing too many collaborative projects with too many participants, because that wouldn't be my experience of how things actually worked in practice over the last, not just in the last LECP, but in the All County Development Strategies prior to that as well. I think good collaboration tends to emerge almost organically, and trying to make it happen is something problematic. And maybe the thing to do is to write in to the plan, not so much who the collaborators are going to be on a particular action, but to write in a commitment to collaboration, a commitment to cooperation, so that if you are approached, you have committed to being open to working with other organizations. So look, enough about that, but it's just something I thought might be worth reflecting on. Yes, now Darren, it's your turn now.
Thanks, Kieran. So thanks so much. So we know we've put a lot of information on you there. And of course, there's going to be lots of different types of actions that you can do. And these different types of actions are going to be related to goals and objectives within your own LECP. But there's some ideas that you could consider going on. So we're going to give you some, for starters, just you're thinking some ideas, but we're aware that we've put probably a lot of information on your back within that last hour. So what we'd like to do is take a little 10-minute break to decompress, get a cup of coffee, let the information we've given you sink in, and then come back again and where we can talk about some of those actions that may be worth implementing in the program. So it's 11 o'clock now. If we can be back for 11:10, and we'll kick off with some of those actions around the economic, business and community outputs, if that's okay with everyone. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to a quick coffee break. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you back at 10 past.
Yeah, very good. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that 10-minute break. So we're going to kick off again now. Share my screen. Perfect. So we're going to kick off around some of those actions around possibilities of things that we can include in the LECP. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic and business side, and then Kieran will pick up the community later on then. So one of the things we have to look about when we're looking at the development of actions for the LECP is the Sustainable Development Goals, because really these are our blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. Particularly when we talk about as we move towards rebuilding our economies after COVID-19, our recovery plans can shape the way the 21st century economy in ways that are much cleaner, greener, healthier, safe, and more resilient. The current crisis really that we're looking at is a profound and systematic shift to a more sustainable economy that works for both people and the planet. And of all the SDGs, Goal 13, the climate action goal, is one with the it's the only one with a modifier urgent. The United Nations, along with all the signatories of the SDGs, recognize that we're at a critical moment in terms of being able to slow down and reverse the global warming path that we're on. The 2030 targets really have inspired an impressive response from our governments, our private sector, local authorities, civil society, scientific community, and much more. But development is not sustainable if it's not fair and inclusive. And rising inequality hinders long-term growth. So we need to ensure that any of the actions that we have within our LECP even, any of the things we're looking at in regards to the development of our counties, any of the strategies that we have in there has that social inclusion and social fairness priorities within them as well, in line with that climate action. We often see that not everyone is subject to the effects of climate action on an equal footing. So we need to ensure that we're looking at areas that may be more prone, giving them a little bit more help and a little bit more actions to look at economic terms for them, and as opposed to some other areas that might be thriving already. So we need to look at, and it's not just that equality, it's equity as well. The other thing you'll hear when you go out and talk to people is that often we'll hear that argument is that Ireland on climate action is that we're too small and change here won't make a difference. And the truth is that there is that power in that collective action, putting together our strategies, the different sections of the LECP working together, bringing our communities and our different types of communities together, brings that collective action forward and can create strength in that. But we have to make sure that we're implementing key ambitious actions in all sectors of the LECP, from building resilience where we can in all our communities, and to reimagining the needs of communities as we move forward. Input into the plan has to be obtained from a wide range of economic development stakeholders, including business leaders, development agencies, sectoral bodies, higher education institutes, and other key influencers of economic development. While certain, I suppose, local authority functions have a very specific economic charter to them or character to them, the economic development role needs to be approached from the perspective that all local government, all community sectors, and all businesses have provide key contributions to this overarching goal. In particular, our local enterprise office or LEO offices are really a core instrument of local enterprise support and development of SMEs and micro enterprises, because they really focus on providing financial support, mentoring, networking support, business, entrepreneurial advice, different types of training and information, and different types of activities that affect enterprises, including rates, procurement, planning. There's an awful lot of work that can be done through some of the local enterprise offices, and there's an awful lot's work. And unfortunately, not a lot of businesses know, and I've seen that firsthand in some of the programs that I help work in. They didn't know they could get someone to come out and do an energy plan or an energy audit with them to help save business, help save energy. Some companies didn't know the different programs like the Green Start, Green Plus, and that are available from the LEO offices. So getting some of that information out to our businesses is really important. Local authorities and I suppose the communities need to take into account the different pathways to work that were produced through the government's national employment strategy as well, which really focuses on helping people back into employment, training, education, and thereby minimizing the long-term effects of the pandemic on our labour force, for whose jobs are permanently lost. So we're going to see those big changes on that local level, changes from the loss of the pandemic, not being able to secure funding, not being able to continue the businesses. And now that business maybe not need us and they need to retrain and do different parts of us. So looking at that job and labour market activation is really, really important within that local authority level. Irish businesses, and we've seen it numerous times, are really responding to Climate Action Challenge. And to date, 69 companies in Ireland have signed up to the Business in the Community Ireland low carbon pledge to reduce their carbon footprint by at least 50%. And this is increasing. This is really the first dedicated, I suppose, national pledge generated by Irish businesses to reduce their carbon. But we can do something like that at a local level as well. How about developing a local carbon initiative plan, looking at where our carbon footprint is coming from at a local level and how can we reduce this? Get local businesses together to sign up to this pledge and monitor their targeted achievements. There's lots of carbon monitoring programs out there, carbon monitoring apps out there. You can also develop a very simple one for local businesses as well. So small things like that that are getting people together is really important. And we can see at a national level where the majority of our carbon emissions are coming from our agriculture, energy industries, or transport. So looking at how we can reduce in some of those is really, really important. And we'll really, I suppose, set the pathway in order to, by reducing those emissions, make economic achievements in those areas by reducing our energy costs. The LECP itself needs to set out an infinite set of key objectives which need to be prioritised and make a significant contribution to achieving the overall economic development outcomes. They need to be specific, measurable, and have to achieve measurable and have associated timeframes. And the LECP should specify relevant outcomes in respect to each of the objectives that you're looking at in that business and community responses, and have appropriate metrics for measuring these outcomes. I suppose in order to generate community, economic, regional resilience, and we need to examine quite a number of factors and have some of these actions in place. Things like attracting substantial investment or new enterprises that will bring employment and income growth potential into an area. And one of the ways we've seen that, and I've seen some information, a lot of it coming out, is that businesses and certain businesses are no longer tied to the locational needs. In the past, for economic terms, there was always that locational directive of a certain business had to locate in a certain area. With the work from home strategy, the online access, the increased internet, now businesses are looking to other areas to set up their businesses because they can do that work from home or have minimized on-site staff. So that's something that we can look at. As well as attracting new businesses, we have to look at expanding our existing enterprises or at least sustaining what's there as well. We know our communities have went through a loss over the last couple of years and we want to minimize that loss, and the LECP is a real way of doing that. And we need to improve the quality and diversity of employment in an area. And it's that diversity of employment that's going to make an area more successful. And the focus on a singular type of employment or a singular economic input can be detrimental if something happens in the future. So looking at diversifying is really, really important. We need to strengthen the economic fabric of smaller towns or villages and their capacity to advance that economic regeneration. We've seen over the last number of years, and I know myself I live in a small village, our businesses have just closed up over the last number of years. But through community involvement and work that we're doing, we're re-attracting businesses to the area and setting up new community directives to attract those people to come and work with us and try and sustain our village from any further degradation and to actually regenerate some of the work that we're doing here. Circular economy, again, is something really big and that we need to look at within our economic and business terms. The roles of circular economy and the increase of circular economy activity is really massive and is going to continue to increase over the next number of years. And when we do all this together and we look at our business side, our skilled employees, innovative practice, climate awareness, business efficiency, and our community side with our connections, our enterprises, our climate justice, when they overlap, we have resilience in our business. And resilience not only has in economic terms, but has a well-being factor to it. And the well-being of our communities, the health and well-being of our communities is really important. And one of the biggest stressors you'll often hear people think about is their job, their money, their livelihoods. And so if we can offset some of that stress levels, then we're building further resilience into our economies and going forward, which is really important. One of the things we can look at is that the development of a sustainable business plan. A recent survey found that although 82% of Irish SMEs were negatively impacted by the pandemic, this disruption also amplified opportunities for acceleration in online digital initiatives and a pivot towards the development of more sustainable business models. Now, you have two types of business models that you'll often hear people or small businesses go. You have a Go Green business model and a sustainable business model. A Go Green business model really is that kind of low-hanging fruit, that short-term Go Green thing that people can achieve. And while we want people to do those and have those Go Green initiatives, what we really want is those longer-term sustainable business plans to be developed. Because the financial fragility of many small and medium-sized enterprises was exposed during lockdowns and closures. So our Irish SMEs reported revenue and profit margins in areas that are hardest hit. So we need to ensure that now we don't we're out of this pandemic or on the way out of this pandemic, that we're looking at our climate action scenarios, our climate impacts that we'll see over the next 7 years don't have just a negative effect on a lot of those businesses. And we need to move that from unsustainable society to a more sustainable. And Ireland has some of the best assets and the best means of achieving those over the next number of years. There are a number of sources that we can incorporate into our data and development plans and how we plan a successful increase in a lot of areas. And we can see those wind energy being one of the areas that we're going to look at and is going to increase over the next number of years within an economic Irish context, with energy capacity, wind farms, and monetary contribution. And it really is an unpopular fact that we have to accept development of significant new infrastructure in and around our communities in order to achieve a green energy sector. Shifting really from those traditional energy to renewable energy requires the development of wind, solar farms, but also extensive new infrastructure to facilitate grid reinforcement, storage development, and interconnections. And this really is anything but straightforward, particularly because Ireland doesn't have vast tracts of underdeveloped land on which to build. So as a result, what we're going to see is new projects will lie within or near a host community. And we're asking a lot of these communities who clearly sustain local impacts from these developments to balance the needs of climate action. And we need to balance those needs of communities and developers in relation to renewable energy infrastructure. And a key preliminary conclusion is that the answer lies in full engagement in the planning process by all parties. If you have a look at any of the wind farms that have been rejected, it's because our local communities, our local businesses didn't have an input into the planning process of it and didn't feel ownership of it. So as Kieran had said a while ago, if people feel part of the process, they're much more likely to take on those actions and much more likely to run with those actions. And if we just think about wind energy in an Irish context, Wind energy really is one of the biggest growing sectors in Ireland and Northern Ireland. It's creating jobs, benefiting communities, and it has the potential to make enough electricity every year to power all the homes in Ireland. It cuts our CO2 emissions, and at the moment there are just over 300 wind farms in the Republic of Ireland. And in 1992, Ireland's first commercial wind farm was commissioned in Bellicorick in County Mayo. So we see that this area of Ireland is on the forefront of this action. And so looking at those community initiatives that happened, what has worked in the past and what's going to work in the future is really, really important. Things like in County Tipperary, really successful one was community power, or the Temple-Derry renewable energy supply, which is really important to look at. And the LECP really can be the asset in promoting the county to new investors and promoting its green credentials as leader in renewable energy. We also have the bioeconomy, and the bioeconomy really covers all sectors and systems that rely on biological resources, animals, plants, microorganisms, derived biomass, including organic waste. Their functions and principles. So really, it includes and interlinks both land management, marine ecosystems, and the services they provide, primary production sectors that use and produce biological resources, things like looking at our agriculture, forestry, our fisheries, and all the economic and industrial sectors that use biological resources to produce food, feed, bio-based products, energy and services. So we're going to see the long-term strategies around our bioeconomy increase over the next number of years. And the Action Plan for Rural Development underlines how the bioeconomy can contribute to decarbonisation, sustainable growth and job creation in our agriculture, industry and technological sectors in rural areas. With 80% of the agri-food sector based in rural Ireland, the potential for a bioeconomy to boost employment in regions is really clear. And outside of that, then we have that materials that we see, and sustainable materials that we're looking at within our communities and within our economic sectors. The market share really of secondary or recycled industries in every country is going to rise to 65% by 2030, with corresponding reduction in primary or raw materials. So what we need to do is look for where industries where raw materials such as metal ores and things like that are prevalent, and see what they're doing and see what the alternatives are and what we can do to reduce, recycle, upcycle things. Goods are going to need to be designed and manufactured to be more durable in order to reduce the overall amount of materials that are consumed through the product replacements. And there's going to be more repairing, reusing and sharing of goods. So looking at skills, those life skills of our electricians, our plumbers, our mechanics, things like that, that are able to adapt these, upskill and replace everything is really important. Going back to those mechanical engineering skills is really important within a local level also. One of the things that we've seen successful within a local authority is the development of climate action teams. And what we've seen in some communities in Ireland is a version of that, a climate action leadership group. And really these groups create synergies with existing networks and initiatives. And it's bringing together people, maybe from the local authority or public participation networks or LEO office or PPNs or leader programs and such, together to say, listen, what is needed in our number of sections, and be cooperative in what's needed. And again, we need to ensure that there's some diversity and social inclusion is imperative in any of these groups. That again, we're not just going to the same people continually, as Kieran had mentioned earlier, that we're bringing new people on that process, bringing new people in, engaging participants from all the different areas, different regions and communities together through innovative and targeted promotional campaigns and bringing them together and facilitating exchange and connections between leaders through visits, through understanding, through information hubs, working together plans and things like that is something to get really good. Because one of the things you'll see is that we should embrace our competitors as collaborators and always view those collaborations as one of the best things that could happen in some companies. So by embracing competitive collaboration, you are learning, getting inspired, and it's an opportunity for growth. Even when the partnership ends, even if it does, and both of you should come out, both of them should come out as winners. If you don't learn tips, tricks offered by the competition, you're on the losing side. And that's what we need to understand with businesses. And when we're interacting with businesses, say, listen, what are the people in your area doing as well? And what can you learn from them? And breed that collaboration part of it, or the cooperation even part of it. And our businesses need to be looking at as a catalyst for change, both our profits, our for-profit businesses and our non-profit businesses, and looking at, and we've seen what's called a nation of ecopreneurs. So people who are looking at the green strategies of their business, increasing new strategies in their businesses, or developing new ways of learning. And we knew there's a new sense of value emerging based on fair trade and ecological sustainability. And we've seen that through a number of different businesses over the last number of years. And there's a number of different things we consider to help our businesses grow, help our NGOs to grow, our local communities to grow in regards to economic terms. And one of the big things we're seeing at the moment is our transport costs and rates. And our transport systems face requirements to increase their capacity and reduce the cost of mobility. And so what we're seeing is some of our businesses have to reduce their business footprint because they can't afford to send their supplies out further within an Irish context. An example of this, there was a brewery in County Cork that had a lot of businesses up from Galway up to Northern Ireland, but who they were supplying were maybe only ordering a half a van of stuff, and it actually ended up being that it was more expensive to transport the stuff than they made. And what they done was made contact with their local business programs and found if anyone else was delivering to these areas as well. And what they found was there's 3 different types of businesses came together and split the transport costs between them. They were able to increase their business footprint, able to make deliveries and reduce their transport costs. So looking at those collaborative procedures within businesses is a good idea as well. As I mentioned, our work from home scenario, we've seen businesses do that as well. Cutting extraneous employee expenses is what we want to do, not employees. We want businesses to be able to keep their employees on board and keep their businesses going. So what we want to be able to help them do is cut some of their expenses, but not their employees. And work from home scenarios or training hubs and things like that, which I'll talk again about, is really important. And the other thing we can do in that is create partnerships for marketing. And getting businesses that link up with each other and may have a follow-on effect. My business will recommend your business, will recommend another business. And if they go for my business, yours, we'll give them a 5% discount. And that collaborative procedure for marketing is really important. Things like small businesses, again, thinking on a local context for me here in Limerick, there was a company that made our sold dresses, and they had a 10% discount if you went to a particular alterations company as well, who gave you another discount if you went to an accessories company. And that created their business and created a line for their business and a circular pattern for their business and helped to actually increase their business. So looking at those kind of marketing procedures for our businesses is really important. I will try not to spend too long on green roof initiatives. I could talk all day about it. I'm a massive celebrant of these. Our green roof system really is an extension of the existing roof that we have on our buildings, particularly public buildings, our community buildings, that at a minimum give high quality waterproofing, root repellent systems, good drainage systems. Green roofs, the green roofs initiatives that we're seeing, and really big within a lot of European cities and North American cities, have shown an awful lot of benefits within local communities. From a climate action standpoint, with green roofs, water is stored and taken up by plants when it's returned to the atmosphere, creating less precipitation, creating less runoff of our rivers. Green roofs reduce the amount of stormwater and runoff, and also delay the time at which runoff occurs, resulting in decreased stress on source systems at peak flows. The plants on green roofs can capture airborne pollutants, atmospheric deposition, and filter noxious gases. And there's a temperature moderating effect of green roofs as well that can reduce demand on our energy supplies as well, and potentially decrease the amount of CO2 being released into the air. They reduced pollution and increased water quality that green roofs provide, decreased demand for healthcare as well, and increased well-being. And they can serve as community hubs, increasing social cohesion, sense of community, and public safety. And from an economic standpoint, it's new skilling, new jobs, new activation, increased demand for local plants, native species to do these, the upkeep as well, and creates a circular economy point of view within those local communities, as well as creating a well-being and a climate action hub, or climate actions within the local community. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about people and why the economic regards to increasing people's skill set is really important. And one of the things we have to look at is, and we can look at through the LECPs, is upskilling programs. An EU report in 2009, Skills for Green Jobs, highlights that the shift towards green jobs will be met by adding green components to the training provision. So there's a certain amount of jobs that are out there that we can have green aspects added onto them, and creating this work with our local education institutes is really important. A greener economy is going to create newer jobs and green jobs. However, employees will need the skills and knowledge to respond effectively to the shift to greener business practices. And there's a number of different examples out there that you can take information from. Things like, I think I mentioned last year, a program I'm involved in called DigiEco, where we take a group of businesses from a local community, train them on sustainability actions, give them some information of how to manage their water skills, their energy usage, their outputs, and let them input plans and come back and see what they've saved over the course of a couple of months, and continue to increase their skills. And this has been massively successful. So something like that can be easily implemented in a number of local regions. There's a number of different established programs out there as well at a national level that we can learn from, or reiterate or reproduce at a local level. Things like our water stewardship programs, which all communities really should look at going forward, the way to reduce water usage within their community. The Climate Ready Academy have a number of different programs and free programs that we should be sending our community leaders and participants on, upcoming in May, for example, of how to become a more sustainable business, a practical guide. And they produce a number of these, and we can take some of these and reproduce them at a local level. And we've seen that people are increasingly want to work for communities who are doing the right thing. And workforce numbers are increasingly interested in learning new environmental skills and working in companies that actively participate in green initiatives. We need to be on the lookout for future needs. We didn't know 10 years ago that everything we would do so much through social media. What are the needs of our communities, and what are the needs of our business and economic terms going forward? What will your businesses look like within the next 6 years? And we need to explore and address the skills gap and training needs in current educational training programs by establishing frameworks to develop competencies of social enterprises and social enterprise practitioners through effective pedagogies for active learning. And a state-of-the-art report was issued by a project called Embed that TUS worked on, and that really looks at supports that need to be put in place at a policy level and a local level and community level to ensure that women, particularly women from maybe ethnic minority backgrounds, can reach full potential and develop social enterprises. And social enterprises really are organizations and businesses that help tackle social, economic and environmental issues at a local level. And they're primarily driven by that social environmental motives and engage in trade and commercial activities to pursue objectives in a local community. So our social enterprises on an from an economic standpoint are really, really important to bring people together, to bring new facilities into communities and to bring new economic opportunities into communities as well. So I'm going to pass back to Kieran Lynch there, who's going to talk about communities.
Great. Thanks very much, Darren. A lot of stuff there. And I'm just going to talk a little bit now about the community side of things and some of the kind of actions and things that you might do. Some of you might have heard me talk about this previously, but it's one idea that I think is really worth considering. And funnily enough, I know what would I say? I warned, would that be the word, or raised some concerns about over-reliance on collaborative type actions, but this is one that certainly could be a collaborative type action between different organizations who are engaged at a community level. And this idea of a community climate action plan, it has, some of these advantages about how engaging with people at a personal level, engaging with them in ways that they understand, getting them actively involved, also gives you a real opportunity to involve those parts of the community that might find it difficult to involve, the hard to reach groups, and at least have their needs considered. So there could be a lot of elements involved in a community climate action plan. And I know you'll have a lot of experience already anyway in doing these community-based plans. And I know quite a lot in your particular area there. I know a lot of it has gone on. But it could be part of an overall plan, or it could just be a specific piece of work itself, a specific exercise. And there's a whole variety of things then that you could incorporate into that type of a plan. And what it really would be saying is, what is the contribution that our community can make to the whole climate agenda? What are the kind of targets we could hope to achieve within our community? And then what can we do? And so that becomes the really critical part, is what are the things that we can do in order to make that happen? And within this particular approach, you can have things like, you can use that asset-based approach, where you particularly look at what are the assets, the sustainability, the sustainable assets within the community. And obviously, some of those assets you need to protect, some of them you need to grow, and some of them you need to develop. And some of them maybe you may need to make use of in a way that they weren't made use of in the past. And there's a process, there's a kind of a technique called green mapping, and you'll find that if you just Google it, you'll find it on the website. It's a way of doing this kind of thing and getting people to recognize the green assets within their area. You can certainly then incorporate community energy projects into this, and that can be sustainable energy communities. It can be indeed, community power type developments as well. And so there's a variety, our micro generation projects. So there's a lot of different ways in which energy could be brought to bear. Darren talked a lot about the circular economy, and there's no reason at all that you couldn't have a locally based circular economy, because actually, at a certain level, the circular economy works. A certain part of the circular economy works at that local level. And a really good example, in a way, of a circular economy is the charity shop kind of phenomenon. I suppose that arose from an entirely different purpose, but you can actually see that it has a great circular economy, reuse aspect associated with it. And you're getting and that I mentioned, and Darren actually mentioned, this idea of reducing the use of materials, that kind of reuse and repurposing of physical objects is it can happen through that kind of mechanism. And so, in other words, that kind of a model can drive a number of different purposes and a number of different outputs, some of them within this whole area and some of them indeed in social areas as well. And of course, as I said, within this, you can definitely have the opportunity to consider the just transition, the needs of those who are more marginalized and how they're going to be addressed. And because you're doing this in a kind of a comprehensive focus kind of a way. So it also will have some advantages in the sense that there's no doubt that funding for a variety of different activities and actions at local level is going to emerge. It has already emerged, indeed, and will emerge more and more. And if this process is done, you've gone through this process, then you're in a very good place to apply for funding for particular projects, because these projects will have emerged in a collaborative, community-based, consultative kind of a way. And these are just some other ideas, climate change competitions, and you certainly could have this as an action. Now, one thing I would say that I would, recommend that in all actions, when you're considering an action, and you'll be well familiar with this approach, but in considering an action, that you're clear on what you are hoping to achieve by that action, and that what you're hoping to achieve needs to be linked in some way or another to one of the at least one of the goals or objectives that you have set out for yourselves at the earlier stage of the LECP development. This is the implementation phase now. But certainly competitions can be a very valuable resource, and you know yourselves at national level the impact the Tidy Towns has had, the impact things like the Pride of Place, the Bank of Ireland Enterprise Town Awards, they've all generated real community-based activity and have produced some very positive things. So something which focuses on climate-related matters, that could be a very good driver of action at a local level. Climate Action Awards as well. Again, communities love awards. They love to be recognised, love to have recognition, and rightly so. Climate change events, with a lot of participation. Very good example around the Dublin area. There was a climate action week, I think it was called, where there was a lot of activity went on, a lot of people participated, maybe like the enterprise weeks and those kinds of things, but where the focus is on climate change. Because sometimes when you have a kind of an intense period of focus on something, it brings it to mind more, it brings it to attention more, it gets more publicity around it. So something on that nature. Again, another area where collaboration could indeed happen, or at least some joint type action. I like the idea of carbon footprinting. Darren was kind of talking about it in business context. I think a carbon footprinting exercise at a communal level could be a very good learning mechanism, and there's some very simple and good tools out there that are free to air that could be used for this purpose. What I find about this. Very useful about this is that it highlights for people, the ways in which they're contributing to climate change in ways that you'd never think about. And it kind of can bring to attention, and in a way in which you're doing it yourself. You're engaging in this process yourself. You're not being told that you're doing this. You're actually finding it out for yourself. And that kind of engagement and that kind of self-learning is much more powerful than where you're told things. Just being told things doesn't always penetrate. It doesn't always work, and it doesn't always stimulate action. But where you learn it yourself, there's certainly a better chance. Putting a climate change element into all funding programs, and I mean, that would be an easy action to do, and it could be done in two ways. I mean, one is that you would be under obligation to show how your proposal would engage with climate action, with the climate agenda, or you could just give additional marks for a project that would have a climate aspect, a climate action aspect to it. I just mentioned this, and I've mentioned this in other places, just this idea of an Office of Behavioural Economics, maybe in collaboration with others, might be, and it might be worth thinking maybe at a sub-regional kind of level. And it's just that an awful lot of what we're trying to make happen now is actually behaviour change. And that's a whole body of knowledge in its own right. And some of the things I've been talking to you about actually come out of this discipline of behavioural economics, which effectively recognises that the decisions we make about things and about how we consume things and so on, they're not driven just by the traditional factors that economics would suggest, supply and demand and price and all of those kind of things. But there's a whole complex series of things in there that drive our decision making. And this, you've probably heard of nudge theory and that kind of idea. Those things have come out of behavioral economics. And I suppose what I'm really saying in this I mean, it could be an LECP objective. It could be a joint office, used by a variety of different bodies. Just worth thinking. I mean, SEAI have a section. I don't know how big it is or anything like that, but they have a section that does deal with this area. So it is something that's worth thinking about, probably. Transport, again, mentioned by Darren, is a very important kind of area. And I suppose one of the areas we kind of haven't properly got to grips with in lots of ways. And certainly while I suppose the electric vehicles and the move to that and other modal shifts will help in this whole area, particularly in a rural context. This isn't always easy to solve. But there are mechanisms through which you use not just public transport, but you make better use of the private transport that is actually taking place in an area and in and out of an area, and you're trying maximize the benefit of that and see what could be done to make something like that happen. And there are some very good models of transport planning and so on, local transport planning and personal transport planning, it is called as well, where you can use a variety of different mechanisms to minimize the impact of transport. Another thing that we were thinking about was a local citizens' assembly on climate action. Citizens' assembly are funny, interesting kind of things, and indeed, as you will know, I'm sure the National Citizens' Assembly on particular issues have been quite interesting. And what has been really interesting about them is that they have come up with recommendations that really would have been a bit counterintuitive. They've come up with recommendations that we wouldn't quite have expected. But that actually is known about this thing, which is actually called deliberative democracy, this idea. And it's this idea that when you gather a cross-section of people together, and when you present them with relatively unbiased facts. Now, I'm not going to say, all facts are biased to some extent, but relatively unbiased facts from experts, it can actually impact on the way they think about things. In fact, typically they see a very substantial shift in opinion. And what they've done in some of these things, they've measured the opinion prior to the events or prior to the process, and then again afterwards. And sometimes there have been, very significant shifts in opinion and in belief, and then ultimately in recommendations about what might be done. So again, this would be the people talking to the people, if you know what I mean. So from that point of view, again, it could be helpful. Work with local HEIs, some participatory action research projects. Again, Darren mentioned that quite a bit about the importance of linking in with, I suppose we would say it, but linking in with your higher education bodies and indeed your ETBs as well in this whole area, because everybody is going to have to be contributing into this area now. Climate change ambassadors and champions, and even the whole social influencers kind of approach. Again, maybe something that could be done in some kind of a joint way is to have some people using social media and being social influencers in this area, because it's part of the modern way of influencing, part of the way things now work. And there's absolutely no reason that climate action shouldn't avail of that potential as well. Without, I think sometimes we're a bit reluctant. We expect, the rational message to work. That's not the way the world is. Other things drive decision making now, and indeed, I've been reading recently. Less and less actually facts are driving decisions. Less and less of that is happening, and one of the really challenging things that is starting to happen is the development of in groups and out groups. We see it in a very extreme case, I think, in the United States at the moment, and it gets to the point in those situations where the facts actually don't matter. They don't matter at all. All that matters is what is my group saying, and that is what I believe. Whatever my group is saying, it doesn't actually matter what the facts are. In the most extreme versions of that, of course, and so that can be a challenge. So we have to think about all of that and respond to that kind of situation as well. Obviously, emphasize and publicize the activities. I think this is another very important thing. We're very driven by example. We tend to respond very much to what others do, and you do an awful lot of excellent work as a local authority. So in terms of driving that on and putting that in as an action, I think, into the LECP around the whole climate change wouldn't be a bad thing at all. And maybe not just yourselves, but maybe some space in which all of the bodies involved in the local development highlight and publicize the action that they're doing, with this intent of influencing individuals and households and communities. So the other thing is kind of allied to that, and also back to that peer influencing, have a space where the good work of communities and other groups can be highlighted, where the examples can be given. As you know, I'm sure, it is a fundamental principle of leader, really, is this whole idea of learning by the examples of others, and of the dissemination of the good practice and the dissemination of the good outcomes. Thinking about that in the climate change context and putting some processes and mechanisms in place through which that can be driven on is maybe something else worth considering. Darren has kind of touched on these as well, but there are a lot of opportunities within the area of habitat management and improvement, all of which is bound up with climate change in a variety of different ways. We won't go into them now, but in a variety of ways. One of them being that, of course, habitats can be impacted on by climate change, but also that you have the carbon sinks from different kinds of habitats and so on, and keeping diversity going is really important, and in terms of water quality and all of those kinds of things. So there's a whole variety of things associated here. So there are really good examples, and there is real potential for things like community forests. This is where a community gets together, gets the area of land, and plants a forest, basically, which is then both excellent from climate action and can become an amenity for the whole community. Wetlands management and maintenance, I'm involved in that myself in Thurles. There's CARO wetlands there, and I know there is a community wetlands forum as well, I think operated out of Irish Rural Link. So again, lots of places there to get some work done and to focus in areas like that. Bog restoration projects, just saw another one being highlighted today on my phone. Natural flood relief barriers, rather than the hard concrete based kind of trying to promote this national flood protection, that kind of approach. So there's kind of having some mechanism within the LECP through which these kind of actions can be supported and promoted. And it might be that the LECP has this mentioned, but some other, it could be one of your collaborating organizations might be the prime driver of this. It could come in under leader, for example. And there is one thing I just comment in passing on this. There is a challenge, and I'm sure you know this as well. There's a challenge in actually getting people and getting communities to take up the funding that's actually there for environmental works. So there is a real capacity building exercise to be done, I think, in that particular context within communities. Over the years, communities have developed a kind of an inherent, what I think we call a tacit knowledge, this kind of understanding of things like playgrounds, sports developments, community halls, meeting places, social housing, even things like that. There's an understanding. People feel they can do that kind of thing, and they have ideas about the kinds of things they can do. That doesn't really exist so much around environmental matters. And there's a piece of work that needs to be done there to raise the capacity and the knowledge, and I suppose the creativity and the vision of communities around what they can do within this whole environmental and now climate action area. And that can be an action in its own right. And then another idea is possibly community-based transport hubs, and because again, that can help with that whole sustainable transport area. And it's where, if you like, where all of the sustainable transport elements are brought together. So there would be a parking area so that you can have a modal shift. So you can go from your car to your public transport. You can have your EV sharing, EV charging at the same location. You can have e-bike rental and e-bike stands and so on at the same location. So you're creating this place out of which sustainable transport can happen. Again, just another idea to consider, I suppose. Okay, so that really is just some ideas around actions at the community level as well, and of course I have to keep emphasizing, even emphasizing to myself, that this is within the context of the whole LECP, where there's lots of other focuses and other actions as well as climate, and we realise that. But actually, what you will probably find as well, and indeed it kind of came through in what Darren was talking about as well, that when you're pursuing the climate side of the climate side, or when you're conscious of it, the things you're doing will actually have other benefits as well. So if you're doing a community climate action plan, you will be achieving other positive things out of that, as well as the climate action elements of it. Okay, so just to talk then about the KPIs briefly, and this is the last little bit we'll talk about. So key performance indicators, there are two sets of KPIs are identified within the LECP, one for high-level objectives and then one for the implementation actions. Okay, so you need to be thinking about two types. And of course, the type of indicator that's proposed is the SMART indicators: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. And all of those words are important when you're thinking about the indicators. Indicators are a funny thing, I would always say. They actually have two functions. We're kind of used to thinking of them as the way of measuring progress. So that if we have a goal or an objective and we have our indicators, we're able to say, right, we know we're making progress towards this because we're measuring this thing and it is moving in a particular direction. But actually, there's a stage before that. When you choose your indicators, you're actually defining what you mean by the goal or the action, because the language often in which goals and objectives and so on is couched is not absolutely precise, and it's not intended to be absolutely precise. It's high level, it's overarching. But when you say this is what that will actually look like, this is what success will look like, you're helping then to define that goal or that objective in more concrete terms. So the KPIs need to be chosen very carefully, because as I say, they're definitional as well as being a measure of progress or lack of progress, as the case may be. The R bit of SMART then is particularly important, I think. The R bit is the relevant bit, okay? And one of the things that's really important here is to make sure that the indicator that you're picking and that you're choosing as an indicator of progress, that you know why you're picking that. In what way will that indicator show that you're making progress? How do you know that? And there is a danger sometimes that indicators are chosen because they happen to be available, but that they aren't exactly the right, you're not really measuring the situation properly. I remember many years ago now, I will admit, I was doing some work in one place and they were looking at the provision of services for people with disabilities. And the indicator they were using was the number of disabled parking spaces that there were in the area. Now, I'm not saying that wasn't an important consideration, but it certainly was not sufficient to give a proper indication of progress. And if you think of that definitional thing, what that was actually saying is, what we're really saying is the provision of facilities and services for people with disability is just about the provision of car parking spaces. So we just have to be careful about that. So there needs to be, some connectedness there between the goals and the indicators. Okay, there was, and I just many years ago, I remember there was a big debate on the radio, people completely disagreeing about farm incomes and whether they were rising or falling. And of course, the problem was that they were talking about two different things. One person was talking about on-farm generated income. The other was talking about the income of farm households. So they were two different things. So if we had been clear on what the indicators were from the start, it was only at the end of the discussion it became clear they were talking about two different things. So that's just to be careful about that when you're thinking about the indicators. And also the measuring then is another important thing. So I suppose there's two things about it when you're thinking about the indicator. The first thing is it a measurable thing in principle? Is it something that is actually measurable at all? And then the second thing is it measurable in practice? And I would say that in this LECP, and I know I'm talking probably more generally now, but it certainly applies in the climate action area because it can be a little more difficult. You may need to put in some processes for measurement. You may need to think about gathering some information that isn't normally gathered at present, and that is worth considering because that's how you'll really be able to show progress and really be able to show achievement. If the measures, if the indicators that you're using are real and are purposeful, but in that context, then you have to make sure that they are measurable in principle and measurable in practice. So first of all, make sure they meet the R test, in other words, that they're relevant and that you know why. And then, is the data already available? Maybe it is being gathered. And then if it's not, is it something that you can gather? And then how would you gather it? And that needs to be put in as part of the implementation process. And I mean, some of the other things that you can consider in a KPI is, obviously we said the relevance and why. And then what unit, at what level do you gather it? What's your unit of gathering? Is it a county? Is it a municipal district? Is it an ED? What is it? How often are you going to gather it? Because again, excessively gathering some KPIs at too short an interval is pointless because you won't see progress over a very short interval. It'll be a somewhat longer kind of a period that you'll want. The other question then is the reliability of the data. Can you rely on it? How is it going to be done? Who's going to gather it? Is it a census type thing that you're looking for, or just a sample? And if it is a sample, then are you going to do that in what kind of way are you going to do that? Is it going to be proactive by you're going out actively doing a survey, or are you just going to ask people to self-report? So there's a lot of considerations that come in there when you're thinking about the KPIs. But the really important thing is to make sure that it is appropriate and relevant, that it measures what it purports to measure. It shows the progress it should be showing, and that it is reliable, and as I say, measurable, at least in principle. That basically, I think, is us done. 12:06, not too bad. I suppose we just wanted to end by saying, this is actually a journey that's new to all of us. We're talking here with some ideas and some thoughts and so on, because I suppose we've been thinking about this a lot, but it is new. The LECP obviously isn't new, but the model this time around is somewhat different. I mean, personally, I think, and a personal view, but I think much improved. But we're being asked to consider topics that are somewhat new, and they're not just new to us, but they're actually new to those that we're engaging with as well. And so the learning curve here is really steep, And I suppose the other point about this is that it needs this blend of skills, the scientist, the business advisor, the engineer, the communicator, the community development worker. It just needs the bringing together of all those skills. And it's worth thinking about how that might happen in practice. And maybe that's something to talk with your advisory group about, is about how that might actually happen. And so bringing it all together is not easy. We're absolutely realize that it's not, but there is a very good framework in the LECP guidelines, I think, and there is very good what would I call it, a very good framework and very good guidance at a relatively high level. What we've been trying to do today, I suppose, is put a few more bits of flesh onto those bones of the guidelines. And really what we've been saying, putting in front of you are just some thoughts and reflections for you to think about, some ideas that might be helpful. We think teamwork is going to be crucial in all of this. Working together is really, really important. And teamwork, and I would really emphasize myself, again, personal view here, but emphasize the teamwork, interagency teamwork, inter-organizational teamwork, as well as within each organization. And that teamwork, by the way, I gave a few different examples of how people can work together. That working together can be people doing individual things, but with the same purpose. It doesn't necessarily mean working together on a specific project. It can actually be knowing that you're doing this bit of it and another organization is doing that bit of it, but it's all aiming at the same outcome or the same purpose. We do need innovation in this because we are thinking about new ways and new things that need to be done, and perseverance always in all of these things. I would say the two key things in public work, public sector work, are patience and perseverance. They're the two things, because a lot of things don't happen straight away, but they do happen in due course if we stick at it. So good luck to everybody on all of this, and successful traveling. As I say, this is a journey that we're on.